People of Reddit, what's one mistake or decision you made that completely altered the course of your life? Wanted to see the Eiffel Tower. Me and my girlfriend at the time were traveling from New Zealand to my family back home in Sweden. We both decided to spend a bit more money to fly back through Paris instead of Amsterdam, just because we wanted to see the tower. It cost us maybe an extra $50 and we got to see it on the landing and then take off, but never actually set foot in Paris proper because we were poor students. When we landed in Auckland, New Zealand, jet-lagged as shit, we turn on our phones and notice that we have about 50 missed calls from our travel agent, which was odd. When we call her, she sounds super relieved and out of breath. She tells us the flight she originally suggested to us, the one from Amsterdam to Kuala Lumpur, was shot down over Ukraine. My brain couldn't process that information at the time, but once I woke up the next day it hit me like a ton of bricks. $50 made the difference between seeing the big steel thingy that has so many photos of it and being sent to Sweden in body bags piece by piece. Sometimes the absurdity of my existence comes over me, and this story always gives me goosebumps. One hell of a story to tell over beers, though. Freshman year I asked some kid in the college dorm's cafeteria if we could sit at his table because all the others are full. Start small talking and he mentions his tuition is free because his dad is military. I'm like, wait. My dad is military and I'm paying? He says that it's because his dad is now disabled. Well, it turns out some of my dad's ailments from military service qualify him as disabled, and guess who got free college after that? And my sister too. They hide the website pretty well and they definitely don't tell vets about the program for their dependents, so my family never would have known if I hadn't sat down with some random guy. Thanks, guy. When I was 27 I missed my usual train to work and had to wait another 30 minutes. So I got to talking to a random guy who turned out to be a doctor. He noticed dark patch under my nail and recommended I go get it checked out. It turned out to be subungual melanoma, skin cancer. I thought it was a bruise and probably wouldn't have went the doctors over it. I never saw him again. I flunked out of my first school. I imagine if I'd stayed and gotten my degree, my life would have been a lot different. Instead I ended up working for a few years, realizing the value of a degree, and restarting my life. It's made me realize that kids shouldn't be forced into college right after high school. Some of them need to work, or travel, or whatever, to figure out for themselves what their path is going to be. 18 is way too young to point a finger at someone and be like, okay, now you need to decide the rest of your life. A buddy of mine called me up one day to tell me he and his toxic controlling girlfriend had broken up and he wanted to celebrate with a few drinks. At the time, I was living a very antisocial lifestyle, and I almost said no, but something that day told me I needed to get out of the house. So I agreed. Turns out that was the night I'd meet my future wife. When we were reminiscing about that night, my wife said she, too, almost declined going out. Not the biggest change compared to others since I'm still a minor, but I completely stopped playing games and watching YouTube. One day something happened to my friend that made me realize these things I do that's been taking 10 plus hours of my days are completely pointless and wanted to do something better. Now I got new hobbies like workouts, cardistry, and I also study more now. Said yes to going to the pub. I was on a backpacking trip around Europe. At a hostel in Belfast, this Australian guy who was in the same dorm as me asked if anyone wanted to join him for a drink. Me and a New Zealander tagged along. We had an absolutely epic night in what was then still a city under martial law. Next day we all went in different directions, but I kept in contact with the Australian. At some stage, months later, he mentions that I should come and visit him in Australia. About 6 months later I did. I had a fantastic time, traveled around Australia and liked it so much that I applied for a residency permit. 30 years later I'm still here. It's been absolutely great, but none of that would have happened if I didn't say yes to a few beers all the way back in the 80s. Ordered a pizza from Domino's. Wound up with the worst case of food poisoning I've ever had. I was essentially bedridden for 3 months and I've since developed severe post-infectious IBS that I've been struggling with for the past 3 years. I'm basically not functional probably 50% of the time. It's essentially destroyed my quality of life, and I'm terrified that I may never have a normal life again. It's taken everything I enjoyed or was passionate about away from me. I read the book Claudius. Loved it so much I scheduled a trip to visit Italy. While touring the sites, randomly met an American guy who was an IT guy, like me, for an American school there. A few weeks after coming back to the States, I email him and he tells me he's getting married and moving back to the States and offered me his old position. 3 months later I was on a plane back to Italy. Lived there for 4 amazing years and made some great lifelong friends. Turning on my old Xbox. Right after high school, I didn't go to college or work. I stayed inside my parents' house for maybe a year and completely isolated myself from the world due to fear of growing up. One day I was bored and decided to power on my old Xbox 360 I hadn't played in a few years, and I noticed my XBL account had a friend request from months before that. Accepted the request, and it was one of my childhood best friends I hadn't talked to in maybe 6 years. Then our third childhood best friend joins the XBL party, and we all start to hang out, and it completely cured my depression and got my life on track. Now 8 years later, and we live together, have good jobs, and are all doing really well. When I was a kid, my mom, my cousin, my sister and I were all about to go to my great-grandma's house from my grandma's house. It wasn't a far drive, so my mom allowed my sister, who was 11 at the time, to sit up front, leaving my cousin and I in the back. My cousin chose the window seat behind the driver. For some reason I felt a need to sit in the middle instead of taking the other window seat. 2 minutes into the drive over, a woman who was clearly not paying attention slammed right into the back seat of the car where I chose not to sit. Firefighter later told us if anyone had been sitting there, they would be dead. Instead, all 4 of us walked out with 2 bruises and a scratch. I failed an unfailable class at university because I totally flunked studying. I was so sure it is unfailable I didn't study at all. I had to retake the class in which there were group projects. Second time over, I was in a team with this girl. I married her last summer. I jokingly signed up for a computer science class in junior high because it was the first year they were going to teach it, and I figured it would be some bullshit easy A. Turned out I love programming, and I'm currently in my 18th year of my career. Got accepted at the best state school where I lived. When my mom found out, she tried to not let me leave for school. Her plan: get a job in a local factory and pay her rent, like she did when she turned 18, so she could use the money to pay for my 3 brothers' college. My older brother was in an expensive private school already, and I had 2 younger brothers. I moved out, went to college on my own, and turned out to be the first kid to graduate. My older bro flunked out twice, first to get a job, first to get married, first to have kids, and first to be childless at a young age. If I had done what my mom had wanted, I would have been fucking for life by my standards. A friend asked if I'd drive with her to pick up her friend at LAX airport. This was so she could drive in the carpool lane. I said yes. I asked her friend to marry me 6 months later. We have 2 kids and have been married for 10 years now. I met a guy online on AOL in 1994. Fell in love. Moved 2,300 miles away from home to be with him. Could have been a disaster. But 26 years later, we are happily married and are still very much in love. Best decision I've ever made. Experimenting with my sexuality. Turns out I'm a flaming lesbo, and I have the best girlfriend with a cute scruffy old dog, living our best lives. Planning on buying our first home in the spring. Decision. It's 1994. I work in a warehouse with my brother's best friend. He tells me about a concert that night that him and his girlfriend are going to, and asks if I want to go. My brother was supposed to go but backed out the night before. They have 4 tickets, 1 each for him and his girlfriend, 1 for my brother and 1 for a girl his girlfriend works with. I went. The other girl and I have been together for 26 years now. Went to meet my bio mom. 8 years later, a crippling disorder, brain damage, and some significant trauma later. Turns out there was a very good reason I was adopted. I got to meet my sisters though, and I'm the uncle to a whole herd of nieces and nephews, and I wouldn't trade that for the world. Makes the damage worth it, honestly. The way their faces light up when they see me and how loved I feel with them is something you can't ever replace. Taking videography as an elective in middle school instead of photo like my sister. Throughout high school I won numerous student filmmaking awards, made tons of friends I never would have had I not joined those classes, developed a super useful skill, and got paying jobs throughout high school because of my skill set. I even got hired at my current job because of my video skills.